Hello, I'm State Representative Karen Boback of the 117th Legislative District in Columbia, Luzerne, and Wyoming counties. A major issue of concern among our friends and neighbors is property taxes. I firmly believe we need to find a fair way to fund our schools and provide the education our children deserve. My guest for today's program is a volunteer activist focused on the elimination of school property taxes and education finance reform. David Baldinger is the founder of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. He's here to discuss the issue of property taxes and several related bills currently in the state legislature. Mr. Baldinger, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Representative Boback.
Well, I'm honored that you're here. I did construe some questions, if you'll bear with me.
Certainly.
Okay. First one, if you would tell our viewers a little bit about how you got involved with the issue of property taxes.
Well, it was 2004, and there was a bill in the House of Representatives at that time to eliminate property taxes. I was nearing retirement, and I thought, wow, this would be really great in retirement not to have to worry about paying property taxes. That's what first got me interested in it. I became an activist for it after that time because I started to understand that it was about the people of Pennsylvania, that the damage property taxes are doing to the residents of Pennsylvania, to our economy, to our job market. And suddenly it wasn't about me anymore. It was about getting this done and making Pennsylvania a better place to live. That was how it all began.
Thank you. Well, you do represent both the Pennsylvania Taxpayers Cyber Coalition and Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayers Associations. What's the mission of these groups, and how do they work together?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second part of your question first.
Sure.
The PTCC, or the Pennsylvania Taxpayers Cyber Coalition, is my individual group. It's web and email based. Currently has a subscriber count of about 3,500 on the email blasts, and the website gets about 1,500 hits a day. I am one group in the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. The PCTA was formed in 2004 with 4 local taxpayer groups. Since then, we have grown to 72 taxpayer groups statewide, and we have one single mission: the elimination of the school property tax in Pennsylvania. We've been asked many times over the years to support other goals, and we've always given the same answer. This is the most important issue to us. It is the one we are focused on, and the one we will continue to work for until we've succeeded.
Thank you. Well, simple question. In your opinion, what makes the property tax an unfair tax?
I could probably go on for a half an hour with this response, but first of all, the basic principle of good taxation is that it should account for a person's ability to pay. The property tax in no way does that. But besides that, you have arbitrary and unfair assessments that can vary greatly within communities. And people wind up being treated unfairly in the amount of tax they pay. The property tax is also not subject to any kind of economic growth, and that's why we see increasing property taxes every year. Property taxes, unlike sales tax or income tax, do not grow with the economy. The only way to get more revenue out of a property tax is to raise that tax. And it's gone to unconscionable levels in the past 10 years. We are almost 50% higher now in property taxes statewide than we were 10 years ago. We can't keep going at this rate.
Would you repeat that? What happened?
We are almost 50% higher statewide in property taxes than we were 10 years ago.
10 years
ago? 10
ago.
years ago, the total of state property tax, school property taxes statewide was about $8 billion. We are now at $12.9 billion. That's how much it's accelerated over the past 10 years. And at this rate of growth, we are going to be taxing more and more people out of their homes. It's got to be stopped now.
And that came during a very poor economy that
Absolutely.
We were going through. So one part was escalating, we're paying more taxes. Meanwhile, the economy was really going downhill.
That's right. And people are having a more and more difficult time being able to afford those escalating property taxes. The demands of school districts are still there. I don't wish to be offensive, but I think sometimes those demands are a bit overbearing, that school districts go above and beyond where they need to properly educate our children, and this is part of the problem too. There has to be some sort of cost controls imposed to try to keep this at a reasonable level. Rate of inflation has been under 3% for the past few years, but still school property taxes continue to rise at about 6% plus per year, more than twice the rate of inflation, We just cannot sustain this. It is unsustainable.
Well, along the same line, would you explain to my viewers how schools are currently funded and why the property tax system creates a poor structure for raising revenues? And I know some of this will be redundant, but I still would like if you can address that again.
Sure. The schools are really funded in two pieces. The first piece is the basic education funding formula, which comes from the state. As originally designed, it's supposed to fund the schools 50%, with the remainder of the funding coming from local sources. Mm-hmm. However, over the years, that has fallen off to just above 30%, putting more pressure on the local taxpayers to fund their schools. Repeat that part of the question again. I sort of lost track of where we were there. Why it creates a poor structure.
Yes.
Because of what I just said, because of the amount of taxes that are necessary at the local level, it's just gotten past the point where we can afford to pay those taxes. And even now, we're past the point where if the state would meet its obligation to fund at 50%, it still wouldn't get the job done because the property taxes have accelerated so much over the past few years. The only solution now is to eliminate the school property tax, replace it with something at the statewide level, which really is constitutionally mandated in the Pennsylvania Constitution. The Pennsylvania legislature is responsible for a thorough and efficient system of education in Pennsylvania. By passing a law in 1948 to allow local property taxes for school funding, the legislature abdicated its responsibility and pushed it down to the local level. This is where all the problems began. The ability to levy property taxes was given to the schools without limit. And they've just grown and grown and grown since 1948, and they have grown at rates that vary greatly in districts. So that's the second part of the funding formula, the local funding, and that really now is probably in most districts where most of the funding comes from, but it is so inequitable statewide. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. There's one school district in Columbia County where about 60% of their funding comes from the state, actually a little bit more. The 1991 funding formula guaranteed that all school districts would get the same relative amount of revenue forever, based on 1991 population figures. So you have a school district like that in Columbia County where 60% of the revenue comes from the state, only 40% comes locally. They don't have a huge problem like that. You turn that around to the York Suburban School District. They've had a fairly large influx of students over the past few years. 89% of their school budget comes from local property taxes. These people are getting murdered by the property tax, but the inequity between, for example, that school district in Columbia County and York Suburban, in one district where 40% of the budget is paid for by the taxpayers, another one where 89% of the budget is paid for by the taxpayers. This isn't right.
And could you explain that? Why is that so?
Because of the amount of money that they receive from the state, and because they are receiving the same relative amount of money that they started receiving in 1991. The state funding formula does not account in any way for changes in student population. So as the school district in Columbia County has lost students over the years, I believe the number I heard was 900 students in the past 10 years. They've still been able to hire 40 new teachers in that same time frame because they're getting the same money they were getting when they had 900 more students. York Suburban, on the other hand, is getting the same money they were getting even though they've increased their student population.
Was that need-based? Is the formula need-based?
And not in this case. All we're talking about here is the fact that the formula does not account for changes in student population. So districts all over the state are facing the same situation. The 50% is the goal for state funding, but it varies all over the place depending on how the student population has changed.
Thank you. Well, a number of property tax proposals are currently being considered in Harrisburg. Your organization supports House Bill 1776, and that's sponsored by Representative Jim Cox. What would this bill do?
Well, it's going to totally eliminate the school property tax and replace the funding from a state-level source. But I want to start out by mentioning something. Most legislation in Harrisburg is done by the legislators themselves without a whole lot of input from the public. What is unique about HB 1776, and I'll also mention Senate Bill 1400, which is the identical bill in the other chamber. This bill was developed in full partnership with the taxpayer groups that support it, and those are the 72 taxpayer groups of the PCTA. We have had input into this legislation from the very start, and this goes back to November of 2010 when this was first discussed, All along the way, we have been able to offer our input into the bill as to what should be in it, and a lot of the provisions we ask for are in that bill. This is something that is unique to Harrisburg politics. You never see this kind of taxpayer involvement in legislation, and we've been very fortunate to have this opportunity that Representative Cox gave to us, that we could have major input into a bill like this and make sure the taxpayer is protected.
Well, and again, you have support that's bipartisan, and you have both chambers participating this time.
That's right.
With the Senate bill, with a matchup, the House of Representatives bill.
That's correct.
And this has been going on now since 2010, that you've been an active participant along
in the crafting of this legislation. And to show the kind of support we have in the taxpayer level, we just had a rally a few days ago.
Yes, we did. And on that note, let's take a moment to view some of the highlights from a rally that was held here in the Capitol. Hundreds joined us to support House Bill 1776.
My mother struggles to keep her home. After my dad passed away a few years ago, she began to find that property taxes were eating up any savings that they had managed to put together. Her and Dad had worked their entire lives, and they provided a home for their two sons to grow up in. That home is filled with memories, sorrows, and joys. And it seems that the cost of everything is going up around her, while her fixed income has seen only marginal increases. Food, clothing, health care, home heating, fuel, all of it is taking its toll, but nothing like the weight that she feels from the increases in property taxation. Each year as property tax time rolls around, my mom struggles to keep her home. The increases in property tax, which have far exceeded her cost of living increases on Social Security, have eaten up their retirement savings in those few short years. While the home is paid for, she faces the knowledge that even if she can't pay her property taxes, she'll lose that home that is supposed to belong to her. So she thinks about selling, even though she doesn't want to. Either way, buying or selling, by selling or by eviction, it's all the result of property taxation.
Good morning. My name is Ed Transu. I farm in Dallas, Pennsylvania. We gave up farming in 1966. My wife and I went to college because there was no profit in farming. The farm's been in a family since 1847. That's 165 years. If we take today's property tax and go back 165 years, myself and my ancestors have had paid $559,350 in property taxes over those years. I wish I could sell the farm for that. The input cost, this is a tame microphone. The input cost of our small farming operation today, our retirement farming, is over $3,300 just in seeds. Do you know it costs $300 an acre to plant corn? $3,500 in property tax. We had reassessment. Beware of reassessment. It is a trap. Our taxes went up by a factor of 6. We sued. We sort of won. When I said I'm going to keep on suing until you won't make any money, they've kindly sort of relented and came back a little bit. We're retired. In order to keep our farm, we need to work just to pay our property tax. PA spends money to promote farm markets, to promote the senior voucher program, $5 tickets. If you're a senior citizen, you can apply for that. All right, and certified farmers, registered farmers can accept those. Additionally, we have a certified kitchen. My wife is a fantastic baker. Shoe fly apply, anyone? We have to sell farm goods and baked goods to keep our head above water. I'm not a farmer anymore, I'm a serf. Property tax, especially school tax, with our new $50 million school in Dallas, Pennsylvania. Ouch.
Under the existing system of taxation, you really don't own your home, you rent your home. And I know a decorated World War II veteran who said to me recently, he hasn't had a child in the public school system in 42 years. And he said he has paid for his house several times over, once from the builder and several times from the school board. This, ladies and gentlemen, is wrong. It's confiscatory taxation with which our founders and framers would be vehemently opposed. So it is time that we stand with Representative Jim Cox and all those who have stood for liberty to co-sponsor House Bill 1776. And I would ask you to please, while you're here in the rotunda, to visit your legislators and tell them how you feel. As a lawyer and businesswoman, adding any appropriate taxes for my services in my invoices won't be a problem. It won't be an issue because consumers have the choice of hiring me for retaining my services, whereas the homeowner does not have a choice. Additionally, when the homeowner has additional money in his pocket that he hasn't passed along in taxes, he may need more of my services. So I would just conclude by saying I sure am hoping that every liberty-loving legislator in this great capital will stand with Representative Cox and sign on and support and enact this legislation now. Thank you.
You've been watching highlights from a rally that was held at the Capitol recently in support of House Bill 1776. My guest, Mr. David Baldinger, and I have been discussing the property tax issue and what House Bill 1776 would do. David, what a number to reflect the bill, 1776.
1776, we declare our independence from school property taxes. This was not by accident. We were discussing how House Bill 1776 and Senate Bill 1400 work. And our intent from the beginning was to keep it as simple as possible so people could understand it and so it would have a better chance of passing in the House of Representatives. The goal, first of all, was to eliminate school property taxes completely over a 2-year period. The first year would freeze property taxes at their current level. Second year, property taxes go away completely, except for a very small remnant left to pay local school district debt. And there were 2 reasons for doing that, briefly. In prior versions of the bill, that debt was assumed at the state level and funded by the state level, but there were a lot of complaints from residents of frugal school districts who said, I don't want to pay high-rate debt or large debt for other school districts. Second problem was the debt payments are about $2.3 billion each year, and that money would have had been found at the state level. The finances for HB 1776 work the way they are. We wanted to avoid excessive tax increases, so we said from the beginning, let's keep the debt local and let the local school districts pay it off themselves. Statewide, debt service averages about 10% of school district budgets. So in the second year, almost all school districts in the state will see their property taxes reduced by 90%. When the debt is paid off, they'll go away completely. The school districts will not allow to add any extra debt financed with property taxes. They will not be able to restructure their debt to drag it out further. Whatever is on the books as of December 31st, 2011 is the debt payments they make. It was really the fairest way to handle that. So anyway, total elimination of school property taxes over a 2-year phasing ability and eliminate the school board's ability to levy taxes. They have one exception, and you can't leave the school boards twisting in the wind. They're going to have legitimate reasons for needing to raise taxes locally, a new school, major repairs, that sort of thing. We left the option in there for the school districts to enact a local earned income tax, but by taxpayer referendum only. They cannot enact it unilaterally. If the tax is for a special project like new school construction, they have to state in the referendum the amount of the money being borrowed, the tax to be imposed, the term of the tax, a sunset date. If they want to do it for ongoing expenses, they can do that too, but it has to pass a referendum, and in the case of using it for ongoing expenses, the referendum has to be renewed every 4 years. That's the basic mechanism. And just let me very quickly talk about how the money is distributed to the schools, because that's just as important. Every school will be reimbursed dollar for dollar for what they lose in property taxes. There are no strange funding formulas, unlike the basic education funding formula. There are no strange formulas involved here. Whatever money the school loses in property taxes will be reimbursed dollar for dollar from the state from the money collected from the sales and income tax. And that's the second part of it, that we didn't talk about the revenue generators either. Revenue generators are, there's a number of small ones in there, but the major revenue generators are the sales tax and the income tax. The sales tax was enacted in 1953 specifically to fund education.
So repeat that, specifically.
Specifically. In fact, the name of the sales tax in law is the Pennsylvania Sales Tax for Education. It was enacted in 1953. Governor Fine was the governor then. It was 1%, and it was specifically for education.
What happened?
It has always been the intent. And in fact, in law, better than 99% of the sales tax is still dedicated to education. But we said from the beginning, since the sales tax was the vehicle that was originally enacted to fund schools, why don't we look at the sales tax to get this done? So what the bill does is increase the sales tax from 6 to 7% and broaden the base of taxable items from where it is now. This is where the power of the revenue generation is in this bill. Most states have a very narrow sales tax, or very broad rather, sales tax base. Pennsylvania, among all the states, has about the narrowest sales tax base. We tax the fewest items and services. By broadening the base, it's going to bring us more into line with other states, but also helps to generate the revenue necessary to eliminate the school property taxes. Now, that by itself doesn't do it, and the second major funder in the plan is a 1% increase, almost a 1% increase, in the state personal income tax. Between those two major funding mechanisms, plus a number of smaller other ones, for instance, the money that's currently going for property tax relief from casino gambling, don't need that anymore. So that can be thrown into the pot. That's close to $1 billion a year. Between the two major funders plus the other small ones, we can generate the $12.9 billion necessary to completely eliminate school property taxes in Pennsylvania.
So the gaming funds that was designated for school property tax elimination, that or
relief.
Relief. Thank
Relief.
you. Thank you for qualifying that, because you know that's a misunderstanding too. I think a lot of people felt that the way we got into the gaming monies, that it would completely eliminate. That was not the intent of the bill.
No, it was not.
Unfortunately, it wasn't, and there is a portion of that goes for property tax.
That's
and it
correct.
also goes for property tax and rent rebates too for our elderly, and people don't understand that.
That's correct.
Matched with our lottery. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you on that, but we would still be using that money, in other words.
Certainly,
That would be part of the
if
formula.
it's there already for property tax relief, well, we're not going to need property tax relief anymore. So throw that into the pot to help the funding. The rent rebate will remain.
Okay.
That money will not be touched. So for those who rent, they will still get their rent rebates, but anything that currently goes to property tax relief goes into the funding.
Into the funding, okay?
Okay.
I just want to go back to the referendum, the part where the school districts, if in fact they're in dire straits, how would they get the money that they would need to fund, as you said, a new school, repairs on a school? I like the idea going back to that referendum, because there again, you know, it would be put on the ballot and the people will speak. Furthermore, there would be a sunset. If the people agree to it, then there would be a sunset, that as of this date, that's
Tax
it.
goes away.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I
You're
wanted
welcome.
to clarify that.
That's not a problem.
Thank you. Another question. Well, we talked a little bit about gaming relief. So now we see how the gaming money would play into 1776. Why haven't any of these measures, because there have been measures before that have been tweaked and that have been gone on referendum, why didn't they work? Was it because they didn't intend to completely eradicate school property tax? I mean, that would be my feeling.
They have always been halfway measures, and none of them have ever stopped the property tax from increasing. A lot of them were local tax shifts, either to an earned income tax or a personal income tax, and they were rejected by both school boards in the case of Act 50 and Act 72, and rejected by voter referendum in the case of Act 1. They were all local tax shift proposals. But the voters are smart enough to realize, okay, we can shift part of the burden from property taxes over to an income tax. But if you don't cap the property tax, it's going to continue to go up. Eventually, it's going to be right back where it was with a new tax to pay on top of it. Local tax shifts have not worked, and they don't work. If we're going to solve this problem, we've got to get rid of the school property tax completely. It dates back to the 1830s. And the whole theory then was, we were an agrarian society, and it was assumed if you owned 40 acres of land, you were generating more revenue than the person who owned 4 acres of land. And it was a proxy for income. Our land doesn't generate revenue for us anymore. Why do we tax people as if it does? I'm sorry, I kind of got off topic there.
No, I'm glad you did, because all of this is to clarify what 1776 would do for our listeners.
That's right. Go ahead.
Well, I'm looking for final words. The necessity. We all know what the necessity is. People are losing their homes.
Absolutely.
People are losing their livelihoods, even with business. Maybe you could get into that, how this would also affect our small businesses, our businesses per se.
I think in a lot of people's minds the problem is property taxes that are too high. Yes, that's a problem. And we've estimated about 10,000 people a year in Pennsylvania lose their homes to tax sales, not foreclosures, just property tax sales.
10,000?
10,000 people a year. In fact, I have a sheet that I have from the Reading Eagle that was published last July. 1,100 properties were up for tax sale. Again, not foreclosure, just tax sales in Berks County alone. Multiply that by 67 counties, and how many do you have? And obviously not all of them were sold. Some were able to eventually settle their tax bill, and they were able to save their properties. But even if only 20% of them were sold, it's still a huge number when you multiply.
One is one too many.
One
correct?
is too many.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. So yeah, the argument is property taxes are too high and people are losing their homes, and that's absolutely true. But a lot of people don't understand the rest of the problem with the property taxes. It's killing small business in Pennsylvania. We have talked to many small businesses who have said we are afraid to expand, we are afraid to hire new people because of the uncertainty in the property tax in the coming years. I was on a radio show in Harrisburg recently, and a small business owner called in and he explained how for years he had planned to expand his business, didn't want to do it because he knew as soon as he started building he was going to be reassessed and have higher property taxes. So he put it off. Finally, he built the building. He planned to hire 9 people to populate it. He was immediately reassessed. The property taxes went up, and they went so high, he was only able to hire 4 people of the 9 he had planned. This is happening to small businesses across the state. We could make a jobs boom in Pennsylvania just by eliminating the school property tax. Residents pay about $10 billion a year in school property taxes. We're talking about putting that money back into their hands to do with as they please. We've seen economic stimulus measures coming out of Washington where money is borrowed to do it. This doesn't cost us a penny. Put $10 billion back into the hands of homeowners in this state and watch how they spend that money. Watch what happens to Pennsylvania's economy. We could have an economic boom in Pennsylvania simply by getting rid of the school property tax.
And you mentioned $10 billion, and I think that's something our listeners have to realize, that what 1776 proposes to do is to come up with the $10 billion, because of course that we'd have to find the funding somewhere, and that's
Absolutely.
why you talked about the 2 different areas that would be tapped into with
That's right.
1776.
And actually the total is 12.9, $10 billion in residential property taxes, 2.9 in business property taxes. 12.9 billion, and we know to a certainty, dollar for dollar, that this works.
How about with ag, if we could finalize that? You know, agriculture is the #1 industry in the state. Our farmers, how do they feel the pinch?
Our farmers are selling off little pieces of their land each year just to be able to afford their property taxes. We're not talking about giant agribusinesses like Archer Daniels Midland. We're talking family farms that have been in families for generations, and they are being splintered just by selling pieces of their farm each year just to meet their property taxes. We're killing the largest industry in Pennsylvania with the property tax, and we're killing the farmers by doing it. It's just unconscionable that this should go on.
Well, I'm quite impressed with your forte with not only 1776, but with taxation as far as school property taxes. You've got such a font of information, and we really appreciate you sharing with us today for this legislative report. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Karen Boback. If you have questions about the property tax reforms being considered in the legislature, feel free to contact me at my local office or through my website. That information will be shown in a moment. Thanks for watching. Thank you to my special guest, David Baldinger, and join me next time for Legislative Report.